President Biden's speech comes in as his approval rating is hovering just above 40%, and Republicans are forecast to be in a good position to retake the House of Representatives in the midterm elections this fall. I'll say that statement is considered controversial in some corners, and I kind of want to keep the aperture open. We'll see what happens. My final guest is the third-ranking Democrat on Capitol Hill. He's a great friend of the Hill. He's someone who's had the president's ear. Welcome, Congressman Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, the House Majority Whip. Always great to be with you, sir. We have a Supreme Court nominee, and we know who it will be. I know that you and Senator Lindsey Graham had also talked about another highly qualified nominee. How do you feel about the president's choice, and what do you think this can do by way of being a constructive contribution to America's legal system and how America sees itself?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Not only do I see this as constructive for our legal system, we've been in existence for 2.5 generations. If you subtract 1776 from 2022, you get an incredible number of years. And never before now has there ever been an African-American woman seriously discussed for the United States Supreme Court. 2 years ago this day, President Biden, then candidate Biden, stood on the stage here in South Carolina and said, if given the opportunity, he would nominate an African-American woman to serve on the Supreme Court. He has kept that promise, and that's what is happening today. In that 2-year interim, a lot of names came forward. A lot of people were pushing names out there. So I decided to get in on the act and put a name forward. And I put the name of J. Michelle Childs, an outstanding judge here in South Carolina. She was one of the final 3 who were interviewed by the president. And the president decided on one. She is outstanding. She will make a great member of the Supreme Court. I applaud the president for keeping that promise, and I will support this nomination as well as this jurist that I expect to be in place very soon.
Well, I'm sure President Biden is going to speak a lot about her and share with the country what he thinks about her qualifications in his State of the Union address next week. Another subject he's going to talk about in the State of the Union is what's unfolding right now, this disaster around Ukraine, the horror around Ukraine. And I think it raises an interesting question that I've tried to been thinking a lot about. And you and I have talked about this before, the toxicity in America, the attack on January 6th of the U.S. Capitol, the toxicity of American politics right now doesn't exactly translate into the rest of the world as an America that is strong and compelling and is the same force it used to be in global affairs. Do you think Vladimir Putin is watching this stuff in the United States and moving now because he sees President Trump calling him savvy and smart and other Republicans divided? I'm just interested in what the foreign policy and national security consequences are of America toxicity at this moment.
Well, I'm so glad that you frame it that way, because I think it's high time for the Americans to take a hard look at our country, where we are, and how we fit into the rest of the world. And when you see Russia, you see an arch opponent. I don't like to use the word enemy, but an opponent of capitalism, an opponent of democracy, someone who's installed himself as president now for over 20 years, and see us buying into his rhetoric. And the people who are doing it are not doing a good service to this country. There is a reason that the founders put into our oath to protect against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There are some domestic enemies of democracy, of capitalism, who would love to see an autocracy put in place. That's why you're hearing these endearing phrases and words coming from people like the 45th president of the United States and a lot of talking heads. That is dangerous stuff. And if the American people want to pass on to their children and grandchildren a free country full of opportunity for everybody, we had better come on board and stop this thrust toward an autocracy which is taking place with the aid and comfort of a lot of elected officials who are enemies of fair, unfettered elections.
Congressman, what is the mood of your constituents when you're out talking to them? Do they still feel that being engaged in the world, both economically and even militarily, that America's presence in the world is good for them? Or do they think it's become a cost to them, that America fought the Cold War and China won, is a line I hear a lot. How do when you talk to your folks, what do they feel?
You know, there is a common thread running among all of my constituents. I can go into a restaurant, as I did on the day before yesterday, one of the so-called high-side restaurants. I can go to a funeral service, as I went to on yesterday, or on the golf course, where I was several days ago, and people are saying the same. They are fearful of where the country is, and they want to see less acrimonious activity taking place. They want to see this country come together. And I have yet to see anybody who say that they support legislation being passed in state after state authorizing the nullification of elections that's been votes cast by Americans. This is crazy stuff, and people are afraid of it. You go up and down the social ladder, and I hear the same from everybody.
One of the other topics we've unfortunately talked about this past year is the racial divide in America. And I'd just love to get a sense from you. We've just seen 3 murderers of Ahmaud Arbery found guilty of federal hate crimes. But we have continued to see, maybe not all at the visibility of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and others, but we've continued to see incidents in communities around the nation where unarmed people of color were killed. And I'm just wondering, in your gut, have we accomplished what we needed to do to begin substantially changing how we police, how we look at our communities and bring them together? I just want to know where you think we are. Have we made progress in the last year, or are we still sort of at the starting point?
Yes, we've made significant progress. And if you looked at where we are today based upon where we were, say, Emmett Till. I was around for Emmett Till. We were around the same age when that happened to him. And so I knew what it was like. I knew what it was like to see Jimmy Jackson, people shot down in cold blood. I remember John Lewis being beaten almost to a pulp. His first beating was right here in South Carolina in the little town of Rock Hill. And nobody was held to account for any of it. Those 4 little girls, how long did it take them down in Birmingham to get an accounting for their murder? So yes, we're seeing now in almost real time, people being held to account. That's progress. But where we need to be, oh no, we're not there yet. All you got to look at Ahmaud Arbery's trial and see that the Justice Department was a bit reticent to go forward with that trial until the family rejected the plea deal. These are the things that people are looking at and saying, are we there yet? No, we aren't. But hopefully we'll continue our pursuit of a more perfect union. We'll never be perfect, but we should always be moving toward that perfection.
Are you satisfied, sir, with the progress of Attorney General Merrick Garland on those perpetrators around the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol?
Well, no, I'm not. I cannot say that I am. I wrote a letter 2 weeks ago calling upon the Attorney General, along with some other members of the Congress, to really either move fast or being a little more transparent. We aren't asking anybody to give up the process, but we're asking to see where there can be some transparency. And the reason we're doing that is, as you said earlier, I talk to my constituents, and when they tell me that they are holding the process in suspicion, you can't be too secretive about the process. It's almost like saying, just trust me. It's going to be all right. Well, I grew up here in South Carolina when trust did not translate into being all right.
You know, you have been such a forceful advocate for voting rights. We know that the voting rights bill that miraculously got to the U.S. Senate floor and was being debated was there for a nanosecond, like 12 hours actually. And I asked in an article I wrote, why didn't Senator Schumer leave it on the floor? You can't stop debating something by majority vote. You actually need 60 votes to stop discussing. Why not leave it on the floor for months? You know, leave it as the front. Do you think that those people who care about that voting rights legislation, which of course included the John Lewis Voting Rights Act as part of what it did, that your colleagues in the Senate and also the White House made the right decision to make that piece of legislation come and go so quickly?
Well, I don't know about that, but I know this. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about what we did not do and what did not get done. Here's what I want to talk about. They tell me that the electoral reform has bipartisan support. That is for presidential elections. I want to see them put that bill on the floor and attach to it pre-clearance provisions that's in the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And everybody ought to be able to subject their changes to the Justice Department or to some court to determine whether or not what you're doing is going to have some adverse or discriminatory impact on any group of people. So I want to see us this coming week go onto the floor with things that we can agree on. And that is, and let me just say once again, stop hiding behind this whole notion that people of color are against voter ID. We have never been against voter ID. We always ID ourselves when we go vote. Every time I go vote, I pull out my voter registration card and present it as the person who is registered there to vote. That's an ID. What we have been against is you telling me that a student ID is not a good ID, but a hunting license is a good ID. That's the kind of stuff that we're against. So let's stop the foolishness and look at what we need to do to ensure that elections can be fair, unfettered, and be able to be insulated from nullification.
Whip Clyburn, it's always great to talk to you. I just have to ask you in closing, I'm going to be up at the hall, you know, doing my job, working up the night the State of the Union is there. I'm going to wave and you know, see you there, hopefully. But I'm interested in, you know, Joe Biden, whom I've had the privilege of knowing for a long time, his style is conversational. He wants to have a conversation, I imagine, with the country. But his numbers are not great right now. And I'm just wondering if you were giving him advice, which I know you do, about how to have that conversation, begin to bring people back to have confidence in what he's doing, what would be the elements most important to you?
Be conversational in every category and let the people know what each category will mean to them, their families, and their communities. It can be housing, healthcare, education, whatever it is. Let the people know this is what my proposals will do for you. This is what they will do for your families. And this is what it will do for your communities. And then I believe his numbers will begin to improve.
Well, House Majority Whip James Clyburn, always a pleasure to be with you, spend time. I always learn from it. Thanks for never turning us down, at least not yet. I imagine there'll be a time someday, but I really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. A very big thank you to all of you and our attendees, and a big thank you to those who joined us to have these conversations. For any of you who missed this program today, we're going to have the video from the event up on our website shortly. We've got a lot of Twitter traffic around it, too. Take a look at that. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.